Please do not listen to this recording whilst driving or operating any machinery. Hello, my name is Ellen Booth and I am a registered clinical hypnotherapist. And in this hypnotherapy, I am going to be telling you a story, a metaphor, about a woman that come to me for help. And this lady had suffered from childhood sexual abuse, and she was an adult survivor of childhood sexual abuse. And after a while that she had been coming to me for help with this, she was able to make a full recovery from her childhood trauma. And the main reasons behind her recovery was as traumatic as her childhood experiences had been for her. The key, the absolute fundamental key to her recovery was forgiveness. And I know that forgiveness is something that is very difficult to do, to forgive someone that wronged you, to forgive someone that harmed you in such a way. And that is exactly why I'm going to tell you this story about how she found forgiveness. Because forgiveness is the key. It does not mean that the person who caused the harm deserves to be forgiven. They do not deserve forgiveness. They deserve severe punishments. But the point is, in most cases of childhood sexual abuse, the person that caused the harm on the child, most of the time, they will never be brought to justice. They will never be punished. In most cases of childhood sexual abuse, the victim never even spoke about it until years later when they were an adult. And the perpetrator who created and caused the harm, because it was such a long time ago that the incident happened, there's no way that the perpetrator will ever be punished or brought to justice, because it's the word of the victims against the word of the perpetrator. It's their word against the abuser. It's only an accusation. There's no proof. And all these years later, when the victim comes out with it, or much later after the events, it's their word against the perpetrator. And in most cases of this, there is no justice. The perpetrator will never be brought to justice by a court of law. There's nothing legally that the victim can do, which leaves them very angry, very upset, and they carry this burden of anger throughout their whole life because there was no justice and the abuser got away with it. Well, sadly, that is the case with most childhood sexual abuse, that the abuser got away with it. And that's just one of those things about many of the victims today. Many of the victims today that are in their 40s, their 50s, their 60s. Back in the day when they were children, childhood sexual abuse was rife. It happened to millions of young children born in the 70s, the 80s, and even earlier. And back then, there was very little knowledge about it. It was unheard of. And if you told an adult, a grown-up, that someone had inappropriately touched you or had done sexual acts upon you, the elders, the grown-ups, they did not believe you. They thought you were lying, that you were telling a horrible lie and making it up. You weren't believed back then. Nowadays, there's a lot more recognition about it, and children in schools. I worked as a cleaner in a school about 4 or 5 years ago. And on the classroom wall, there was a poster saying, if any of you children have something you need to talk about, and it said the teachers' names, who they could go and talk to. And it said, you will be believed, you will be heard. You see, nowadays, children get the support over these sorts of issues. But back in the 70s and 80s, children back then, there was no recognition. And any child that reported being inappropriately touched or abused in this way, these children were not heard and they were not believed. And it got swept under the carpet. It got swept under the carpet like it didn't matter. Like, oh, the child will just forget all about it and move on. It was just left as a series of incidents that did not matter. They were treated with... They were not taken seriously. They were not dealt with. It was just swept under the carpet, as if the child was just telling lies about the person that committed the abuse. How that adult, that father, that uncle, that stepfather, that brother, that could not possibly commit such an act. No one could possibly believe that their husband, or that the father of their children, or that the uncle, or that the granddad could possibly do something so horrendous. No one believed the children. And these children today, that are now in their 40s, their 50s, their 60s, that were never heard and never believed. They carried it all through the childhood, all through their adulthood. And it got swept under the carpet, so most of them have never really spoken of it since. And even in today's society of 2025, the year we're in, there's a lot of help out there. If you look on Google and look on the internet, there's a lot of counsellors and therapists that deal with this sort of thing. And I can tell you now, It is rudimentary, because the help on this kinds of matters of childhood sexual abuse is very rudimentary. There's lots of help out there, but it is not the right help. It's not the right help. The right help is not understood. And I can tell you now, I understand the right help. I do personally understand what the right help is. Because I have a confession to make to you. I, Ellen Booth, registered clinical hypnotherapist. I am an adult survivor of childhood sexual abuse. I am an adult survivor. And I was born in 1981. And when I grew up throughout the 80s and the early 90s, no one could possibly believe that that sort of thing went on. They thought the child was simply just making it up. And it got swept under the carpet because no one believed you. And I can tell you now, I left home at the age of 17 years old. And leading up to the age of 17 years old, I had suffered this kind of childhood trauma. And I left home at 17 years old and escaped. I escaped what was going on. Throughout my childhood, I was never rescued. I was never rescued. No one saved me. No one saved me from what was happening. I was never rescued and I was never saved. There was no one that saved me from the fates that I endured. And between the age of 17 years old right up to very recently in my life, I'm 44 years old, and it was very recently, around the age of 43, nearly 44, I was able to make a full recovery. I suffered greatly. I suffered immensely. I suffered the worst suffering that you can possibly imagine as a result of all this. I suffered greatly for 26 years. The pain, the agonising pain that I suffered from having been sexually abused as a child. Oh, it was horrendous, the suffering. But how I was able to relieve my suffering was through forgiveness. Forgiveness to my abuser. It was forgiveness. It was forgiveness. And when you forgive your abuser, all that suffering goes away. I had very little help from other therapists. I became a therapist at the age of 22. I was 22 years old when I went into hypnotherapy training. And for the past 22 years, I've done a lot of therapy on myself over the childhood sexual abuse. I had a bit of help from other therapists, but very little. Most of the help I did on myself. And I know what works and what doesn't. And I have now actually made a full recovery from the childhood sexual abuse, but it's only been probably about in the last 6 months that I've made a full recovery. I suffered for 26 years. I would have got a shorter sentence if I'd committed murder. But no, my suffering was pretty much lifelong. And I'm now 44. And I'm like, hang on a minute. I've grown up and got old. And I've suffered my entire life. And I've realised that life is for living. I wished that I could have moved on years ago when I was a lot younger and enjoyed my life, but no, I've suffered right up to my early 40s, and it's only now that I'm actually starting to live my life with happiness that I deserve. But I look at it, I'm not religious. I don't follow a religion. But one thing I have found that's helped me is that I believe in God. I believe in God. I believe that there is a creator of the universe that governs the whole universe. And I believe that God is holy. I believe that God is the ruler and supreme leader and creator of the universe. And I believe that God has a lot of love. And one thing that helps me find the forgiveness for my abuser that I need is, it comes from Christianity, but I'm not Christian or religious, but one thing in Christianity that they say is, I forgive others how God forgives me for my sins. You see, I'm not perfect. I've made mistakes in my life. I've caused harm to somebody else. There's been times when I've caused great harm to someone else over my life. Doesn't make me perfect. Okay, so I've never sexually abused anyone, but I have done things that I regret that caused harm to someone. And I forgive my abuser. I forgive my abuser as God forgives me for my sins. You see, forgiveness is something where you forgive and you let go. You let go of that suffering. You have to forgive your abuser, because that anger and that hatred and that suffering that you carry from what your abuser did to you, as I said earlier, because the abuse doesn't get spoken about till years later, the abusers got away with it. They're never going to be brought to justice. There is no justice. You have to accept that they did what they did. They got away with it. And I know it makes you very angry that they got away with doing such a hideous, awful act of crime on you. But that's the sad truth. You have to accept that they did get away with it. They're never going to be brought to justice. You have to accept that. They're never going to be punished. They did what they did and they got away with it scot-free. There's no justice in it. The only justice that you may find that gives you peace in your soul, is if you come forward about your suffering and the abuse. When you feel comfortable about opening up about it, and that you're in a position where you're able to talk about it, that you come forwards, that everyone comes forward in this world that we live in. If the millions of survivors come forward, and we'll all talk about it, and we'll raise the awareness so that it stops, we break the chain, so that it does not happen anymore to the younger children of our generation. So that you do a good thing with what happened to you. And you know what? My abusers, there was 2 of them that got away with it. They'll never be brought to justice. They both got away with it scot-free. And the only justice that I will find is if my 26 years of suffering was not for nothing. If my 26 years of suffering helps others, I want to help others make a full recovery like what I have done. I want to help others recover. And if my pain and suffering and my understanding of this helps other people recover, then my suffering would not have been for nothing. It would be put to a good cause. It would be put to helping others. And in a way, it makes me think that maybe my suffering was fate. Maybe it was my life's purpose in this life of mine that I am living. Maybe it was my life's purpose. Now, I'm not talking about whether past lives and reincarnation is true. But maybe in this current life that I'm living, maybe I did something in a past life that led me to the karma and fate that I've had in this lifetime. But I know one thing. The only way I can possibly find peace in my soul is if I help the millions of other survivors out there. If I help them. I've been a therapist for 22 years. It's taken me about 20 years of therapy to make a recovery from this. I have the knowledge to help other survivors recover probably over a 6-month period to maybe 1 year. 6 months to a year of therapy that I would provide on someone would help them make a full recovery, because I know how to do it, because I've done it on myself. And then they would not have suffered for 26 years like what I did. That's the only way I'll find peace in my soul. To help other survivors recover a lot quicker than what I did. I suffered for 26 years. And my aim is to make people's recovery take about 6 months to a year, so they don't suffer for 26 years like what I did. Only then will I find peace in my soul. That's the only way I'll find peace. It does not matter so much the severity of the indecent acts that were performed on the child. It's not so much about the actual sexual abuse that was inflicted. It's not so much about that, what they did. You could spend hours describing the nature of the horror that was inflicted upon you. That's not going to help you talking about the way you were abused. It's not going to help you talking about how the abuse made you feel. Well, that can help with repressed feelings, but talking about having counselling and talking about all of the gory details that were inflicted upon you, that I personally found does not help. It doesn't help. It does not help to talk about it so that you relive the trauma. And survivors of this trauma will try anything to help themselves. I've talked about the horror of what was inflicted upon me. I've talked about all aspects of the abuse, and none of it helped. All as it does is it makes you relive the trauma, and it just disturbs you further. The only method that I actually found that relieved me and relieved my suffering was forgiveness. Forgiveness was the key. It's forgiveness. I'm telling you from my own heart. It's forgiveness. If you forgive, then everything else that happened doesn't matter anymore. It doesn't matter the sick, indecent sex acts that they performed upon you. That don't matter anymore. It doesn't matter about any of the horrible details. As long as you forgive, if you forgive the person that wronged you, that abused you, if you forgive them and you understand that forgiveness, the horror of what happened, you can put it behind you. Talking about the horror of it, in my experience, does not help. What does help is forgiveness. Because if you forgive, especially if the act of the sexual abuse was incest, if we're talking about incest, where it was a very close family member that committed the crime upon you, not only do you have to deal with the fact that you were sexually abused, but you have to deal with the fact that it was a trusted, close blood relative that did that to you, that totally abused their position and abused your trust as a child that you had in the adults. When it's incest, and that close blood relative totally abuses their position, can you not see how forgiveness is the key? Because it's the betrayal of that close blood relative not only causing indecent harm upon you, but it's the betrayal of trust, that they were trusted implicitly by you. You trusted them as a vulnerable child, and they committed that act of betrayal of your trust, where you were a vulnerable child and they abused their position and totally abused your trust. That's even harder to deal with when the sexual abuse was incest, because it's not only the actual acts of indecency that they harmed you with, but it's the betrayal of trust. And incest is actually one of the most common forms of childhood sexual abuse. It is very common that it was incest, because in research that I have done, it's very sad to say, but in research that I have done, it is actually the child's paternal father that is the most common abuser. Next it was the uncle, and after that it was the stepfather. But it is very sad to say that most cases of childhood sexual abuse were incest. And as I go back when you were a child and you may have told a parent or someone that this person was doing this to you, and they could not possibly believe that the real father would do such a thing. But it was. And you know what? There's a fundamental part of childhood sexual abuse that it gets passed down the family. People who were abused in this way as children, they then, I'm not saying everyone does, but a large proportion of adults that were abused themselves will then abuse their own children. It gets passed down the family. All of those abusers that abused the children that are the adults today, they were abused by people in their family when they were children. Now I'm talking about maybe 100 years ago, in the 1920s, where sexual abuse was unheard of. Children were sexually abused. Then when they grew up in the 1940s, maybe the 1950s, they then went on to sexually abuse their own children. And then when those children grew up, they then sexually abused their children. Because going back in history, it was unheard of. It wasn't spoken about. You never said anything like that. It was unheard of. And back in my generation, in the early 80s, when I grew up throughout the 80s and early 90s, it was still the same. No one believed you. Nowadays there's a lot more recognition about it, but I think for a lot of people in today's society, I think the chain has been broken because there's a lot more recognition about it these days. And this is another part of forgiveness. Your abuser that abused you when you were a child, it's highly likely that when they were a child they were also sexually abused, and it gets passed down the family through generations, and their abuser that did it to them was probably abused when they were a child. This is why I emphasise Christianity's saying where they say, I forgive my abuser as God forgives me for my sins. Where the childhood sexual abuse is being passed down in the family, I forgive my abuser as God forgives me for my sins. That abuse that's been passed down the family for generations, is it their fault that they sexually abused you? When they were kids and when they were growing up, it was unheard of. Quite often what happens is these adults, they grow up, they never spoke of it, they never said a word of it to anyone. They had children themselves, and when they had their own children, they could not control their actions, where they could not control their actions and ended up sexually abusing their own children. Something has to be done about this. Not the hatred, the anger and the bitterness in your soul about who abused you, not the anger, the hatred or bitterness that you feel, which you have quite right to feel, but that doesn't solve the problem. What does solve the problem is that we now, in 2025, we break the chain. We make sure it stays broken. And we forgive our elders, for they knew not what they did. They knew not what they did. They could not control their urges. They could not control their actions. And it wasn't just young girls, little girls that were indecently touched. Back in my generation, when we grew up in the 80s and in the 90s, there were millions of young boys that are now grown men in their 40s, 50s, who were sodomized and sexually abused by men. And because these adult men now, when they were boys, because it was homosexual sexual abuse, they're too scared, ashamed and embarrassed to tell anyone. All of the adult men today that were sodomized as children, there's no way they can open up to other men about this, because it's a deep shame that they carry within them. They won't tell anyone, the men of today, of how they were inflicted this terrible crime upon them. They can't tell anyone, because it's more painful probably than the girls that it happened to, because, well, I can't possibly imagine what it was like for all of the little boys of my younger generation to, you know, they never told anyone. They won't tell anyone. They won't talk about it. And there are millions of adult men out there who have many problems and difficulties in their life because they were abused by a man when they were a small boy. And if any of you adult men are listening to this and you were one of those poor unlucky young boys that did happen to, I urge you to come forward. I urge you to come forward about this, because there's millions of you adult men that were abused as young boys. I'm not just talking about, it was commonly known that they were abused by members of the Catholic Church, like it was priests that were doing it. People think of it as, oh, it was those priests that did it in the Catholic Church. No, it wasn't. It was the father or the uncle. It was mainly the father, the paternal father, the uncle. It was mainly teachers and people who worked with children and that were getting away with it and doing it to young boys. But what I want to say to you adult men out there who were once young boys, who may have been through incidents of indecency of this nature, whether it was sodomy, whether they were sodomized, or whether they were just inappropriately touched. They might have just been inappropriately touched, or they may have been forced into performing sexual acts on an adult or something. I urge you adult men out there, right? You be brave, you be strong, and you come forward about this, because you do not have to suffer in silence. You do not have to suffer alone. I've got a few male friends that have confided in me that they were assaulted as children. I've a few male friends who it's happened to, and I know that it's something that must be very hard for you to think of this or to talk about this, but we need to help each other. I mean, for crying out loud, it's 2025, right? We need to come forward about all of this. We need to help each other. There were millions of adults today who were abused as children, and even now, not enough have come forward about this. Nowhere near enough people have come forward about this. The only way to get the justice that's needed, the only way to make sure that it never happens again to our children, is for all of the adults to come forwards. And for us to come forward without shame, without shame about it. But it's a difficult subject because a lot of the survivors who are now adults out there, the perpetrators that did it, the abusers, may still be alive, may still be in their life. Maybe their mother never knew and is still married to the father that committed the act. It's a very awkward and delicate subject because a lot of the abusers that committed these crimes are still in the victim's life, and it is a very difficult subject to broach. But even if you're not able to say who did it to you, it doesn't matter if you don't say who did it to you. It doesn't matter who did it. You don't have to go into that. But for crying out loud, I urge you, from my own deep pain and suffering, I urge you to find that forgiveness in your soul. I urge you to find the forgiveness that you need for those who wronged you. I urge you to find it in your heart to forgive. Because once you forgive, you'll let go of that suffering. And I'm just looking at my little timer on my dictaphone, and I've just realised I've been talking for 43 minutes. I didn't mean to talk for 43 minutes. It was meant to be a quick introduction and then I was going to do some hypnotherapy. But that hasn't happened. I've now been talking for 43 minutes and I haven't done any hypnotherapy yet. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do. It's been 43 minutes. I'm going to do 20 minutes leading up to an hour, or it'd be about 15 minutes now, leading up to an hour, and then after an hour it'd come to an end. For the next 15 minutes I'm going to do some hypnotherapy on forgiveness. Okay. And as I said earlier, you may like to sit up and listen or lie down with your eyes open or closed is absolutely fine. And you will have full control over your own mind throughout the whole process. And you can accept or reject any of the suggestions you hear me say. But just focus on your breathing. Just focus on your breathing and notice how with every breath you breathe in, you breathe in calmness, relaxation and peace of mind. And with every breath that you breathe out, with every breath that you breathe out, you breathe out any worries or tension. You breathe out any negativities. You breathe out any emotional rubbish, any baggage, any negativities, any bad feelings, anything that makes you feel anything but happy, anything that does not make you feel happy and positive, any of that rubbish, you breathe it out of your being. You breathe it out and dispose of it with every breath you breathe out. One by one, every breath you breathe out, you expel anything that does not make you feel happy. And as you breathe in and out, as you breathe in, you continue to breathe that fresh air of life. Every time you breathe in the fresh air of life into your lungs, into your body, into your entire being. You breathe in positivity. You breathe in calmness, peacefulness. You breathe in all of the wonderful, wonderful, wonderful feelings that you could possibly ask for. You breathe in life. You breathe in a new beginning. You breathe in a whole new experience of life. You breathe in knowledge, potential, new learnings and experience. And you can do all of this with your breathing. With every breath you breathe in and out. And this is a process that will continue throughout. With every breath you breathe in and out. And as your breathing continues to relax you deeper and deeper as we go on, as you focus on the sound of my voice that will go with you wherever you go, however deep you drift. The sound of my voice allows you to follow each and every word you hear me say, because there is nothing of importance for you to do right now other than to just follow each and every word you hear me say. No thoughts, no distractions, just a calm, clear mind. Because any other thoughts in your mind right now, they are all unnecessary. So you have no thoughts, no distractions, and all of your unnecessary thoughts just melt away with your breathing. With every breath you breathe in and out, they melt away. Your mind's shutting down from all of the unnecessary baggage of the mind, the chitter-chatter of the mind. You just let it go and it fades away. And this is all done by your breathing. As you breathe in life, you breathe in air, you breathe in life. Life that serves you well. All of the positivity, all of the happiness. And with every breath you breathe out all of the rubbish, all of the tension, all of the negativity. And this is a process that will continue from now on. Every second of every minute of every hour of every day, week, month, year that goes by. From now on, every future second of now that passes, and in the present moment of now, as well as every future second that passes of now, constantly breathing in life, happiness, positivity and joy, and breathing out and expelling yourself of all rubbish that you wish to get rid of. And your breathing is constant. Your breathing is the element of your life. For as long as you breathe from now, you'll love yourself. You'll love yourself for as long as you breathe. For as long as you breathe throughout your everyday life. You do this with your breathing. Breathing in all the good stuff and breathing out all the bad stuff. You do this constant. For as long as you breathe for the rest of your life. And one thing one thing I'd like to leave you with a few final thoughts. You cannot change what has happened in your life. You cannot change the past. When you were a child and you were growing up and you were not responsible for your own life, you were led by the elders that looked after you. Your life was determined by the elders that looked after you. You had no choice on your future when you were a child because your life was dictated to you. Your childhood you cannot change. And your adulthood that leads up to now. Your adulthood that has led you where you are today has been a journey that you have undergone and taken. But I want to tell you something that you may or may not be aware of. When you are an adult and you are old enough to take your own decisions in life, when you became an adult, when you became of age, when you had grown up, maybe you realised it, maybe you did not. But we are not a victim of circumstances. Everything that happens in our lives is based on what we choose to do. We are not victims of circumstances. Everything that happens to you in your daily life is all based on what you are doing right now. There is only now exists. The past, your past behind you, does not exist anymore. Because the past only exists in people's memories. It is not what is happening right now. The past will only exist in people's memories, and half the time those memories get distorted, and it wasn't even what really happened. It was a similar version of what happened, but not what actually happened, as things get distorted in our memories. And obviously the past is not what is happening right now. It only exists in people's memories, so therefore it is not in the present. It is not what is happening to you right now, so therefore the past does not exist anymore. And the future doesn't exist because it hasn't happened yet. The future is based on everything you do right now. There is only now. Every future second, minute, hour, day, week, month, year that goes by is all based on what you are choosing to do right now. There is only now. You make your future by what you choose to do right now in this very second, this very present moment, and you are choosing to listen. You are choosing to listen to my therapy. Right now in this very present moment, you are currently listening to my therapy. And this therapy that you have listened to is going to help make you feel a bit better. You are not a victim of circumstances, because you're going to move on. You're going to move forward. You're going to help yourself feel better about everything. You're going to help yourself find the forgiveness that you need for what happens. To find that forgiveness. And you're going to do whatever you need to do to put the past to rest, to put it behind you and move forward with your life. You're going to achieve great things. You're going to achieve many wonderful achievements that are ahead of you. But your first achievement that matters the most right now is that after everything I've said over the last hour, that you find the forgiveness that you need. You forgive your abuser as God forgives you for your sins. You forgive the abuser just how God forgives you for your sins. You're not perfect. No one's perfect. Have you ever killed a spider? For example, let's say you were hoovering your house and you saw a spider and you hoovered up the spider. Or you stamped on a spider and killed it. Or there were, I don't know, this is a poor example, but let's say there were mice, that you had a problem with mice in your garage and you put a load of mouse traps down that killed all the mice. You killed a living thing. You killed a living thing that had the right to live as much as what you had. But it was a pest and it was in your way, so you got rid of it. But nevertheless, it was still a living thing. Have you ever, inflicted maybe harm on something else? As I say, it might have been a spider, it might have been a mouse, it may have been... But we all do things that are not perfect. It's like in a court of law. If you kill another human being, you would go to prison for murder. So, of course, you wouldn't do that because in our eyes it's considered wrong, and it's considered wrong in a court of law. But it's okay to kill all the mice in the garage that are a pest and put mouse traps down and kill all the mice. Don't go to prison for killing the mice, but they are still living things, just like us human beings. See, no one's perfect. So forgive your abuser as God forgives you for your sins. No one's perfect. Let it go. Let it go. And move on. Okay. I'm now going to bring this therapy to come to an end. But just before I end this therapy, I just want you to know that in the deepest deepest depths of your heart and your soul, your mind, your body, your heart and your soul. I want you to know something. That you were never to blame. It was never your fault. What happened was beyond your control. There was nothing you could have done to change it. There was nothing you could have done to stop it. It was your fate. It was what was destined to happen to you beyond your control. And you've grown up into an adult, into the person that you are today. And what doesn't break you makes you stronger. You're the wonderful person that you are today for a reason. You are a wonderful, amazing person of who you are today because of your life experience. And I hope you find peace in your soul. I hope you find peace in your soul by finding that forgiveness that you need to find. Amen. Amen. Okay. In a few moments' time, I'm going to awaken you. You'll hear me count from 1 to 10. You'll become more and more awake with each ascending number. By the count of 8, you would have opened your eyes, and by the count of 10, you'll be fully wide awake, and this hypnotherapy will be terminated. 1, 2, 3, waking yourself up. 4, 5, 6, more and more awake. 7, 8, opening your eyes. 9 and 10, fully wide awake. And the hypnotherapy is now terminated and has come to an end. Thank you very much for listening.